Hi, I'm James and I'm Harry's dad. During the day, I'm a scientist, which is someone that develops medicine. Today, I'm going to read the book Woof, chapter 20 called Little Lucy. I hope you enjoy it. For the next few days, Eric and Roy continued to swap ideas. They made notes and, in Roy's case, tracings to put in the dog file. They argued about wasting Eric's file paper. Roy had a habit of starting again if he made the least mistake. They argued about which was the best theory. Eric had added the position theory, at Roy's insistence, and the jigsaw theory to the list. Then on Friday something happened. Eric and his family were having their tea in the kitchen when there was a knock at the door and his gran came in. "Oh, you're having your tea, are you?" She had an excited but also rather sheepish look on her face. She was carrying a cardboard box, which she placed on the floor. "Hello, Gran," said Eric. And his dad said, "What have you got there?" Emily, meanwhile, had immediately left the table and gone over to the box. Eric's gran made no reply, but put a finger to her lips. To Emily, she said, "You have a look," whereupon Emily pulled back the folded top of the box and peeped inside. As she did so, a small, rather anxious-looking brown and white puppy peeped out. "A dog!" Emily turned and beamed a dazzling smile at her mum and dad. "A little dog." "Before you say anything," said Eric's gran, "you don't have to keep it. It can stop with me if you like. Emily can come round, it'll be hers, but I'll look after it." But of course, once the puppy had licked a few hands, had a little bark, and generally shown his pleasure in their company, they did keep him. Mr. Banks complained about grandparents spoiling children, and promised to get his own back on Emily when she had hers. Mrs. Banks said she might have preferred an older, slower dog. But for all that, by the end of the evening, the puppy was well on the way to becoming an established member of the family. In the days that followed, Mr. Banks bought him a collar and a lead, and Mrs. Banks bought him a basket. Roy, as soon as he heard the news, bought him a rubber bone. Actually, he'd got it already with another dog in mind. Eric took him and Emily for frequent walks in the park, and Emily christened him. As a matter of fact, she christened him twice. Lucy Banks to begin with, and Monty, following some persuasion from the others. On the Wednesday after school, Eric and Roy were sitting on Eric's back step, watching Emily in her sandpit. Monty was temporarily asleep in the kitchen, his little belly bulging like a grape from recent eating. "Look at her," said Roy. You'd think she was being paid. Emily was digging vigorously and bustling about with buckets and jelly moulds. At that moment, Monty came clambering over them. He galloped across the grass and flopped in the sandpit. Emily at once abandoned her digging, wiped her sandy hands on the lawn and gave him a hug. "She's really mad about dogs, your sister is," said Roy. He smiled. "Hey, I just thought, it could be her, you know." "What could?" Eric was flicking a nearby flower heads with the puppy's lead. "Emily," said Roy, and he laughed. "It could be her thought waves that's causing it. She'd rather have a dog than a brother." Eric laughed too. He gave Roy a shove and stood up. "Come on, Emily. Time for a walk." And Roy said, "That's it, all right. The power of wishing." Half an hour later, Eric and Roy sat on a bench in the park. Emily, with Monty on a lead, was running round them in ever-widening circles. A short way off, a game of cricket was in progress. The players included Philip Dobson and his friends again, and Kenny Biggs and Hopper. As usual, there was as much quarrelling as cricket. All the players were umpires, of course, but Hopper was the chief of the umpires. His decisions were, at times, eccentric. Now and then he appeared to tackle an opposing batsman from his position at short, square leg. But on this occasion, Eric and Roy were less interested in cricket and more interested in Emily. She was some distance away by now, standing still and looking back at them. She seemed quite tiny and insignificant. Monty was pretty well invisible. Against the broad spread of the park pitches, the tall poplars behind. Roy, however, was not deceived. "Look at her," he said, and shaded his eyes with his hands. "The brains behind the whole thing." I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for listening.